have here Seth Goldman. He's many things, but amongst those, founder and change agent of Eat the Change, co-founder of Plant Burger, chair of the board of Beyond Meat, and founder of Honesty. A pleasure, Seth.
I'm sorry we didn't get the chance to be in person this year.
Hopefully, we'll be waiting here for you, whenever you want in Spain, and it's sustainable as well. If we speak about disruptive innovation, really new disruptive products, services, business models, which do you think are the biggest barriers for bigger companies to innovate in a disruptive way towards sustainability? Because these days with the COVID, we've seen like some disruptive innovations that were there for sorting out big issues. And usually when we are in normal situations, it's much more difficult, no? That this kind of innovations flourish, no? So which are the main barriers? What would you say?
Well, I think actually what's most hopeful about this moment is everyone has been disrupted. The way we live, the way we interact with people, the way we connect and communicate with each other. And so that actually, in my view, creates the most ripe environment for disruptive ideas to be adopted, because we are changing our behaviors. You know, if you had just said, well, we're all going to stop traveling, everyone would have been in rebellion. And if people understand, you know, this is a reality we have to face, that's just one example. Or, you know, thinking about our buildings and how we live in them, that's also been disrupted. So I actually think this is the best time to commercialize disruptive ideas, and then obviously they have to resonate with the moment. And so one of the things you've seen around the world is quite a new look at what has happened with our food supply. So the way we have raised and cultivated the primary protein in our diets, which has been animal-based meat, we're seeing fundamental re-examination of that, not just because of its environmental impact, not just because of the way our relationships with animals has helped really foster this pandemic, but also because of the working conditions that the humans involved. Obviously, you want to talk about the working conditions for the animals, that's a totally different topic, and not one that is redeeming. But that kind of moment really does give people the opportunity to rethink it and change their behaviors. So I think any company that is operating with the same business plan that they had in January, if they're operating today with that same business plan, they're going to find themselves irrelevant. So you have to recognize the moment and adapt to it.
And Seth, if we think in terms of behaviors and in terms of mindsets, no? When you look at, I don't know, you have experience, no? Because you've experienced like this, your own companies, you founded. You found Honesty, you were working in the Beyond Meat experience. Now you are driving new innovations, new initiatives, but at the same time you've been in contact with big multinational companies, no? So what are we missing in that connection amongst that world, no? Because
I think it's much closer now. I think the big companies, it was easier to live in a bubble and just assume you had a business that could work without really being as close to the consumer, as close to the environment. And I think this moment has highlighted that is not the case. You know, this pandemic affects everybody, right? So when you watch these conferences, I've attended a lot of online conferences, and you're speaking to a CEO who's also speaking from her home, you know, or his home. That's a different reality, and I think that helps forces everybody to get more connected to what's happening. I think overall, I think that'll have a positive implication. And so, you know, the other thing that this has triggered is the sense of connectedness, that everything we do, every action we take has ripples. And so what somebody does, you know, in a market, you know, in Asia could have impact on our health here. Our choices about what we consume and how we consume it has impacts elsewhere. And I think that was easier to deny before all of this. And so I'd like to think going forward, that will be something people will be, and companies will be more attuned to as well.
Do you think that leaders of companies should change and have then more like a a systemic view, no? Because leading the company now means leading the system, leading in the industry.
Well, look at how powerful, and you may not have seen it as much in Europe, but in the United States, for example, this whole issue of race relations had been something that a whole layer of society was, I would say, glossing over or ignoring. And now every company understands they have to have a point of view on this. They have to recognize it and acknowledge it and say something about it. And it's only a small minority of companies that haven't done that. And even 3 months ago, that would have been inconceivable. So I do think this, like I say, this moment has disrupted a lot of the normal patterns of our behavior. And I believe in the long term, that'll be a good thing.
And Seth, what do you think about consumer? I mean, you've made a big breakthrough there with Beyond Meat, for example. How do you see citizens? How do you see us?
Yeah, I do think they are feeling more conscious of their choices. Now, on the one hand, there's a recession going on, so they have to be a little conservative with their purchasing decisions in terms of what they spend on. But I do see more of a aspiration to try to make conscious decisions. And we've seen it. We've seen it in the plant-based space. So certainly, more the fastest growing categories in grocery right now are plant-based dairy and plant-based meat. Right, that's a pattern of behavior change. But I think it's happening in other ways. And actually, from an environmental perspective, consumers are having the lightest footprint that they've had. Because they're not traveling the way they used to. They're not consuming things the way they used to. They're actually saving quite a bit. So, of course, I don't think that's sustainable in the long term, but it does create a new behavior pattern that people might recognize and say, oh, some parts of this I can continue if things get back into a more vibrant economic mode.
I wanted to ask you one thing. When you do this kind of disruptive things, you look for the perfect thing sometimes, no? You look for the perfection, no? And this is a problem as well, because of course, you don't do anything if you look for perfection. Yeah. How was your experience there?
I would say you never look for perfection. You always look for continuous improvement. So can you start in a place that is fundamentally better than where it was, and then can you challenge yourself to continually improve what you're doing? Can you continue to go after each step of the innovation? And when you do that, of course, people will try to copy you. But if they succeed, they're only chasing your ghost because you're already on to the next iteration and the next improvement. And so, all the companies I've been part of, you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And so that means get something up there. It has to be good enough that it represents what you're trying to do. But then you continue to challenge yourself.
Yeah, and Seth, how did you manage, for example, in Beyond Meat, to involve clients, customers, and stakeholders so quick? No, also around your story, around your purpose, your personal purpose, because you always, since I met you, you always speak about the same thing. No, you speak about purpose. Yeah.
Right. Well, we always. This is part of being close to the consumer. So. We're close to the consumer at the store level. We're in the stores. We're doing these samples. Well, we were. Of course, that's changed now, right? We're not in the stores the way we used to because we can't have that interaction. So, from a social media perspective, we're very closely connected to our consumers. And, if something's happening out there, we're going to hear about it very quickly because our consumers are so engaged with us. They recognize, I would say, that we genuinely care about these things and they want to share their opinions. And don't hesitate to do that, which is great. We're very fortunate, and that's been true of all the businesses I've been part of. And frankly, that's something that the large corporations often miss. They think they're saving money if they, cut down on consumer feedback, or if they don't have people in the field, but then they miss what's happening, and it's a blind spot that a lot of big companies have. They try to put all consumers into one bucket. And of course, today, everything is about personalization.
I wanted to ask you as well about this connection between innovative companies that appear like yours and the connection with big multinationals. No, sometimes it feels that the only connection you can have is just to buy like a little company to become innovative. No, do you think there are other kind of connections that can be exploited in a better way?
It generally seems that the most effective way for these companies to innovate is to let somebody else do it and then they buy it. I haven't seen. Now, there may be some areas where they have the ability to keep innovating, but it takes investment, and you can look at the level of investment of innovation, and at the publicly traded food companies, their level of R&D investment is usually under 1%. That's very small. At Beyond Meat, it was closer to.
And Seth, I wanted to ask you briefly about your view on the food industry after what we've gone through with the COVID. The COVID is profoundly disrupting the global food supply at nearly every level. How do you see these problems? Because we have many people at risk, no? Like 300 million people at risk of going hungry in 2020. I mean, how do you envision the future of food and beverages? Which are the barriers? Which are the biggest challenges? Where would you start to change things?
Well, what's ironic about all of that is we do have the capability to feed everybody. So it's not that the food doesn't exist. It's not that the land doesn't exist to grow the food. It's how which foods we're emphasizing, which foods we're prioritizing. And, we could shift the farmland that's being used to grow crops. And right now they grow crops, and those crops are fed to animals, and we lose most of the crops in terms of the weight of the nutrition is wasted. It doesn't end up reaching the consumers. And so I think we have to rebalance our food system and find ways to get more plant-based foods to people, which are both better for the environment, better for resource conservation, and of course better for the health of the consumers as well. So this isn't a case of us trying to find another planet to grow food on. It's a case of taking the planet we're on and reprioritizing what is grown, how it's grown, how it's made available to people.
Which recommendations would you give to food companies that are now facing the future? No, if you find a CEO in an elevator, what would you tell him of a big multinational company?
So I would certainly shift more towards plant-based because that's where consumers are headed, but it's also what's more sustainable. It's what's scalable. There are whole continents or parts of continents that don't have the environmental capacity to sustain a domesticated livestock industry. And so rather than invest in that, why not shift to agricultural system that is something that can be sustained and people can feed themselves. That's going to be far more resilient. I think the other thing this is all exposed is there are inherent weaknesses in our food system, but in our planet. And so, this was a health disaster, but we know there's going to be more environmental disasters to come. And I think those again expose that our planet, the way we've created our living on it is not as resilient. The planet is resilient, but the living conditions we created for ourselves are not as resilient. So we have to just recognize this is going to be the trend in the future. And I'm afraid that although it may not be this COVID-19 is what's in the future, it's going to be some other pandemic. And so there too, we need to understand we have to change the way we're living to anticipate these kinds of problems going forward. And I hope it doesn't take an environmental disaster to force us to make fundamental changes as well.